Protesters demand justice for Julian Assange as a judge in London begins considering the U.S. request for his extradition. Canadian police arrest land defenders at a rail blockade in Ontario. And Zambia schools target intolerance and the Bolsonaro government as Rio gears up for the main Carnival parade. Hello and welcome to Talasur. I'm Doris following Keto, and this is from the South. Dozens of people have gathered outside Woolwich Crown Court in southeast London, protesting the possible extradition of WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange as his extradition hearing gets underway. The protesters say the case against Assange is a threat to press freedom and individuals' civil liberties. A Crown judge has begun hearing arguments from U.S. government lawyers who want to try Assange on espionage charges relating to the publication of U.S. military and diplomatic cables 10 years ago exposing war crimes committed in Iraq and Afghanistan. If convicted, he faces a total of 175 years in prison.
We are here because it's been tested on us, on Assange, what's going to come on us. We're here for democracy, for freedom of speech, and for the life of a man who showed the courage, had the courage to reveal the secrets of the deep state that we wouldn't even know in the history books.
If you look at the overreach by the US government, it decides that they can actually hunt down a foreign journalist who published on foreign soil the truth. It will send the signal that no journalist anywhere in the world is safe from the overreach of the US establishment.
So for more on this case, we are joined by John McVoy, an independent journalist in London. Hi, John. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
So can you tell us how things are looking or what is taking place as it relates to the court proceedings at this point in time?
Yes, so the first day of the court proceedings has pretty much finished about an hour ago today. As things have gone, the prosecution has, according to at least official WikiLeaks spokespeople, the prosecution has kind of brought the exact same things that they've been bringing for the past 10 years. They've been saying the exact same things, that the WikiLeaks leaks have put citizens in danger, they put people in danger, that Julian Assange didn't adequately try to redact the documents that went through. And they've also said today that the claim that he might end up with a 175-year sentence is hyperbole. So they're basically saying that, the activists and WikiLeaks are going over the top with the claims that he might end up with a jail sentence of 175 years. And the response of the defence today has been that this entire prosecution has had 10 full years to prepare the case, and today they've came up with absolutely nothing new whatsoever.
So what can we expect to see next? Because if the defence would have already presented on behalf of Julian Assange, what's next for this case?
Well, tomorrow, so I spoke briefly with Joseph Farrell, who's the WikiLeaks official spokesperson, and Kristin, the WikiLeaks editor today, and they both said that tomorrow is going to be a day full of quite major revelations. We're fairly sure one of them is going to be about the apparent offer that was given to Julian Assange by President Trump regarding the connection, or the alleged connection, with Russia. So tomorrow is when the defence is going to present fully. And they've basically promised some major revelations, so that's in stark contrast to what the prosecution has brought today, which is basically the same old argument, nothing new whatsoever, and nothing really that convincing as well. I mean, Julian Assange's father actually came out today and spoke to the press, and he said, during the Chelsea Manning case, it actually was written into the court that nobody was ever harmed. There's no evidence that anybody was ever harmed as a result of WikiLeaks documents that were published, and so they're bringing that back up in the court again. So, long story short, tomorrow should be a day full of big revelations from the side of the defence.
If extradited, John, do you think that Julian Assange has any chance of a fair trial in the US at all?
It certainly appears not. I mean, if you look at the court proceedings thus far, if you look at the treatment of Assange thus far, it's basically riddled with legal anomalies that all point in the direction that none of this trial is going to be free or fair whatsoever. So, I mean, Julian Assange was kept in the Ecuadorian Sea in arbitrary detention for many years. He should have technically have served his time had he been convicted of the allegations that were put against him legally. Then he was taken. He was taken out of the Ecuadorian embassy, put into Belmarsh prison, which is known as the UK's Guantanamo. He's in prison with terrorists and murderers, etc. And he was in that legally on a bail skipping offence. And we got 50 weeks on that offence, which is virtually unheard of. And then he was actually kept onwards after that for apparent fears that he might abscond. So I mean, we've already seen that the entire story has been riddled with a completely unfair treatment of Julian Assange. And now if he actually reaches the destination of the US, we can only expect that it would actually get worse. Sorry, can I just add to that as well? Just this week, Declassified UK have released 2 separate articles suggesting that some of the judges involved in this case are utterly compromised because they have various financial links to the UK Foreign Office. So there's major questions over the independence of the British judiciary at the moment. And I mean, that's just talking about the UK, not even the final destination of the US. So I don't think there's any way that Julian Assange can expect a fair trial there.
Yeah, and as you've mentioned, it seems as though he's already been convicted based on his present situation and circumstance. But we have seen a lot of protests in support of Julian Assange. Can we expect to see more demonstrations like this?
Yes, definitely. Well, I actually came over to Belmarsh today with a group of French activists. Now, 143 different French activists came over from Paris last night. I joined them on about a 12-hour journey just to get to Belmarsh today, just to show some support for WikiLeaks, for Julian Assange, but obviously especially for press freedoms. There was a German cohort there today, and there were people from various different countries, and there was roughly 120 people, I'd say, outside today chanting as well. So I feel like the momentum is there at the moment. I mean, even today, The Guardian, which has consistently worked against WikiLeaks and worked against Julian Assange, has actually come out today painfully in support of him. So it seems like the wind is definitely in the sails of those in support of WikiLeaks and press freedom.
John, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes. So my final question to you, you mentioned earlier about questions being raised about the integrity and independence of the judiciary in England. And then we have Boris Johnson and Donald Trump being compared. Do you feel like with that sort of alliance between these two world leaders, if that could have any sort of implication on Julian Assange's case?
Well, I mean, we're looking at a post-Brexit world now, where the influence of the US in Britain is only going to grow. So it's that relationship is only going to strengthen in the coming years as Britain becomes more isolated on the global stage, as Britain looks to the US for a global ally essentially. So it's not looking good on that front.
Thank you so much, John. We are out of time, but we really do appreciate your insight on what is taking place with Julian Assange at this moment.
Thank you very much for having me.
John McVoy, independent journalist in London, speaking with us about the end of Julian Assange's extradition hearing that will continue tomorrow, and we will provide you with an update when that comes in. So for now, we'll take a short break. Don't go anywhere.
innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Soldiers in Haiti have shot at police officers who have been protesting for days, demanding improved conditions of service and the right to form labor unions. On Sunday, the protesting officers, accompanied by civilian supporters, attempted to march through the presidential palace to seek an audience with President Jovenel Moïse. The march was, however, brought to a sudden halt after soldiers guarding the palace opened fire at the procession. In Chile, hundreds of demonstrators gathered at Quinta Vergara on Sunday to reject the Viña del Mar International Song Festival. Demonstrators say the festival is part of the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship's legacy and also a sign that current President Sebastián Piñera pays little attention to mass protests against social inequalities that have overtaken the country since last October. Meanwhile, there were several reports of festival security heavily repressing demonstrators. Still in Chile, a group of protesters in Valparaiso vandalized the monument of the heroes of the Battle of Iquique using paint bombs. Defense Minister Alberto Espinosa heavily rejected the incident, warning demonstrators that such acts of vandalism could easily lead to the authorization of firearms against protesters. Moving back to the Caribbean, a man who would have turned 60 on Sunday has died from injuries incurred following a fire at the Heaven Fesco service station in Mandeville, Jamaica. The fire started around 5 p.m. on Friday after gas was spotted pouring from one of the pumps at the petrol station. 4 other people were seriously injured in the blaze, which damaged a section of the station and 12 vehicles that were on the property. In some lighter news, dubbed the greatest show on earth, Trinidad and Tobago's Carnival is in high gear with Juve celebrations that started at 4 a.m. this Monday morning. Juve is derived from French patois and means daybreak. It marks the official start of the 2-day Carnival celebrations in Trinidad and Tobago. Patrons release their inhibitions and douse each other in colored powder, paint, mud, oil, water, and even chocolate. Others bring folklore to life by portraying traditional characters. Moving to Brazil, tens of thousands of revelers are out on the streets of Rio de Janeiro taking part in the world-famous Rio Carnival. Vying for the title of Carnival champions, the city's 13 top samba schools will have 1 hour each to wow spectators and judges with elaborate shows, colorful dancers, and drummers. This year, Carnival is also being used to take a stand against intolerance and oppression of minorities by the government of President Jair Bolsonaro. Reigning champions Mangueira are staging a parade that will tell the story of Jesus being born in a favela, who stands up to prophets of intolerance.
This matter of religious intolerance, I personally prefer to say that it is religious racism. It's not only intolerance, it is more than that, because it is prejudice against the African Brazilian cultures. Today is very intense thing, mostly because there was significant progress of neo-Pentecostal religions, Christian fundamentals, and some of them, not all. We can't put everything in the same basket, but some have a really hostile speech.
But on Saturday night, security forces in the city of Porto Alegre attacked Carnival revelers for allegedly not observing requirements to end all activities by 9 p.m. Several members of the public sustained minor injuries in the chaos after military police officers started firing rubber bullets and tear gas canisters into the crowd. Our correspondent Brian Meyer from Ouro Preto tells us what concerns Brazilians most these days and why they are taking it to the street carnivals across the country.
For hundreds of years, Brazil's street carnival has been a moment in which people from the working class and the poor can express their dissent with the government, with the bourgeoisie, and the status quo. And here in the city of Ouro Preto is no different. This city was founded in the 1600s, and it's had a big street carnival for over 200 years. There's some drum groups here that were founded in the 1800s that are still playing the same rhythms on the street. And like everywhere across Brazil, the carnival goers are wearing costumes, criticizing the government, and breaking out in spontaneous chants against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Carnival's going on for another couple of days, but across the country, this is turning out to be one of the most politicized carnivals in Brazilian history, as more and more people are rising up against the resurgence of neo-fascism.
That was our correspondent Brian Mayer with that report. And now for the next part of our series, Failure of an Invasion. On February 23rd, it seemed an invasion of Venezuela had begun, with the excuse of bringing humanitarian aid. The attacks were directed at the armed forces in an attempt to break their unity. Madeline Garcia reports.
The attack seemed imminent. The United States and its allies were preparing the invasion for February 23rd, with the use of so-called humanitarian aid.
They do the same thing everywhere. The US uses humanitarian aid to appear as the good guy, and even when there really is humanitarian aid, they use it to bring in weapons as well.
The aid organized by the US government has a strong political connotation. And the United Nations, the Red Cross, or Caritas cannot take part in a political action, which uses humanitarian aid.
Top U.S. officials, from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to the head of the U.S. Southern Command, joined in.
You will ultimately be held accountable for your actions. The President has been quite clear, and our job as military professionals is to be ready.
The response to such threats was stronger than ever.
Look here, Yankee, you won't intervene in my country. Come here and you'll get a beating. We will be your Latin American Vietnam. Never traitors, always loyal.
The Venezuelan military also began to prepare to defend peace in the country.
The Bolivarian armed forces are not afraid. We are deeply patriotic, and the strongest weapon for a soldier or a civilian is their patriotism.
Patriotism was not the message the US and its allies were hoping to get across, but the Venezuelan armed forces showed they were not for breaking.
My Commander-in-Chief, allow me to present you with the first rifle fired by a member of the militia, trained under the revolution. It is a token of civilian military unity.
In Venezuela, we want peace. We have the right to peace, to develop our country. And we do not interfere with others. We are peaceful people. But nobody should interfere with us. Donald Trump, take your hands off Venezuela and cut the threats.
Hijos e hijas, hermanos y hermanas,
sons and daughters, brothers and sisters of our armed forces. Now is the time to resist, to struggle, and to keep going forward. This is no time to relax or to doubt. No, it is a time of dignity and patriotism.
For Venezuela's revolutionaries, it was indeed the time for resistance and struggle. But for the extremist opposition, it was time for war and death.
Either the aid comes in or it comes in.
There will certainly be an intervention in Venezuela. All those who oppose humanitarian aid will be considered the enemy. There will be an act of war. So they will have to confront the multinational forces who will enter Venezuela. They have until the humanitarian aid arrives, and that will be led by an army from Brazil and Colombia, with of course a contingent from the United States. But there's no need to be worried, because this does not mean war. only that they will neutralize all those who try to stop the humanitarian aid from arriving.
In Venezuela, something strange has been happening for the last few years, because it is Venezuelans who go off and ask for us to be invaded or for them to seize our economic assets, as happened with Citco.
I want to make it clear that if anyone had the least idea that any leader of our armed forces, myself included, was going to lose heart or break ranks in the face of all these circumstances, they were sorely mistaken. I think that was part of their attempt to trick people, and that is why they failed.
They failed totally. They ran into a brick wall of a united army. Their big gamble was that the armed forces will split on such a scale that it will be possible to overthrow President Maduro and for Juan Guaidó to have his own armed forces, but that never happened.
It didn't happen, because in this moment of maximum aggression by the United States, the unity between the people and the armed forces held firm, and its most lethal weapon, the Bolivarian militia and the country's new doctrine of defense, is what we'll be looking at in our next episode.
Madeline Garcia, Telesur, Caracas, Venezuela.
Shifting gears now, today marks a year since the Cuban people ratified the new constitution. 7.8 million of the nearly 9.3 million eligible voters cast their ballot in a referendum where 87% voted yes in favor of the new Magna Carta. That referendum followed several months of constitutional reform debates, which were held around the country, during which the Cuban people had the ability to act as a constituent body, discussing proposals that had been debated in National Assembly. The approved constitution was proclaimed by Commander Raúl Castro in the National Assembly of People's Power on April 10th. We have more stories coming up, so stay with us.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en ahí.
Dot in the eye. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Israeli Defense Forces have carried out airstrikes on the besieged Gaza Strip and the Syrian capital Damascus, killing 6 people. On Sunday evening, military jets targeted the Gaza offices and storage facilities of a Palestinian resistance group that Israel accuses of firing projectiles into its territory. And a few minutes before midnight local time, missiles launched from the occupied Golan Heights killed 6 people near Damascus International Airport. Most of the missiles were, however, intercepted by Syria's air defense system. In a related development, Israeli authorities have passed a decision to reduce the amount of food and other basic services offered to Palestinian prisoners in their custody. According to the Palestinian Prisoners Club, the prison authorities will cut the amount of bread, meat, and water allocated to them. The number of books allowed and family visits will also be reduced. More than 6,500 Palestinians are languishing in Israeli jails, including over 500 who are being held under the so-called administrative detention laws. The laws allow Israel to detain people without charge or trial for a renewable 6 months period. Canadian police have arrested a group of land and human rights defenders at a rail blockade in eastern Ontario. A stream of police vehicles was seen moving in early on Monday, with 10 Mohawk warriors subsequently detained as authorities attempted to clear the area. The Tayin-Dinaga blockade was erected by the Mohawk people in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people, stopping all trains going through their territory. They pledged to maintain that blockade until Wet'suwet'en chiefs confirmed that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had pulled out from their unceded ancestral lands. Actions have been held from coast to coast against the impending Coastal GasLink pipeline project. A South African judge has issued an arrest warrant for Julius Malema, leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, after he failed to appear in court for a pre-trial hearing on Monday to face charges of unlawful possession of a firearm and reckless endangerment. In this case, Malema and his bodyguard are accused of discharging a firearm at a political rally in 2008. Malema's lawyers, however, have argued that he was not obliged to appear in court since trial has not yet commenced. The warrant will, however, not be effected until the next court appearance on May 8th. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is coming under fire for spending $18 million to host U.S. President Donald Trump for his first official visit to the country that'll last 36 hours. Our contributor Navodita Kumari brings us more on these developments.
Near the Ahmedabad airport didn't exist 2 weeks ago. In fact, it was made in a hurry to hide the view of this slum from the US President Donald Trump, who arrived in India just a few hours ago. There are about 2,500 people living in this slum, which lacks the basic amenities like potable water, electricity and toilets. They told me that they feel humiliated by this move, as they say that the amount of money they spent on this wall, they could have used in making a school or maybe a hospital. The government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi has spent $18 million just in welcoming Trump in this city, which means that every minute Trump spends in this city, it costs the government $90,000. But the question is, can this wall hide the fact that India is home to more than a quarter of world's poor, and it ranks 102nd out of 117 countries in the Global Hunger Index? This is Navodita Kumari for Telesur English from Ahmedabad.
That story brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many others on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media.